Hi, everybody. Major Justin Lechner, test pilot here at Edwards Air Force Base. I fly the C-17, the KC-46, and most recently a test pilot for UAV unmanned vehicles.
Major Mark Hammond, also a test pilot here at Edwards. I fly the KC-135 and KC-46 at the 418th.
Hi, everybody. It's Captain Ryan Weed. I'm a test pilot here at the 418th as well. I fly C-5s and C-17s.
Greetings, everyone. Major J. Carroll, also a test pilot at the 418th Flight Test Squadron at Edwards, and I fly the C-17.
Hello, everyone. My name is Major Miguel Carrera, and I am a test pilot at the 418th as well. I currently fly the C-17. I came from a previous background, which was C-130s. Right. All right, let's get started. Well, this week we're talking about flight. So one of the most important parts about flight is the air mass that we actually fly through. So Justin Lechner is going to give us a brief talk about air in general.
Okay, I don't know if you can see me.
We can see your head.
I've got some demonstrations here that I'll run through to kind of just demonstrate what air is and how air mass works and how we create lift. I understand that part of the lesson plan for this particular week is learning about the forces of flight, thrust, drag, lift, and weight. And the fun one to demonstrate for this is lift and what we call Bernoulli's principle. So this just looks like an empty 2-liter bottle because it is, but it's not actually completely empty. There's actually air inside the bottle. I have a little crumbled up piece of paper here, just crumbled up into a little ball like this. And you can expect, right, if I just were to blow on this, it rolls away if I blow on the little ball. If I put the ball inside the opening to the Coke bottle and I blow on it, there's air in here. The air is actually going to push back, and it's not actually going to move. So you can see, even though it's empty, there's air in there. It's not a trick. It's not stuck. So air is an actual thing. Air is what we use to create lift, and it's the movement of air over top of the wings on an airplane that create that lift.
Great, yeah. So the next demonstration we're going to do kind of describes how that lift works. So you've seen the pictures before. You have lift, or the airfoil. If you take a cross section of the wing, it's kind of shaped in a very unique manner. You have a curve across the top, but then you have a flat underside. And the reason behind that is, as air moves across the wing, or airfoil as we call it, those molecules of air will split, and you'll have some that go across the top and some that go across the bottom. Now, the ones that go across the top, they'll move faster than the ones across the bottom. And what that does is that creates a differential pressure. And that's a big word, but basically it means that you have less pressure on top and more pressure on the bottom. And that effectively gives you what we call lift. Now, this demonstration will show you exactly how that works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put air through these two balloons and create a lower air pressure system in the middle of it, and you're going to see these balloons move together. Okay? And I'll do that right now. There. It didn't quite go the exact way I wanted to, but let's see if we can move these just a little closer together. There's a little bit of air flowing inside the room here, so it kind of makes it a little difficult. But there we go. All right. And you can see that they come together. And just to show you that it's not me just blowing on these, I can also do it on the outside of the balloon, and it will pull the balloon away. If you back up just a little bit there. There we go. Oh, stabilize these guys. And it kind of pulls the balloon away from this balloon. And the idea behind it is that you have low pressure over here and a higher pressure here, and which creates a force and moves the balloon that way. And if you do that over a huge surface area, otherwise a wing, you can lift an airplane. And that's effectively how lift works.
We actually have just two more demonstrations to show this principle. And these are just everyday objects that you can have from home. You have a hairdryer and a ping pong ball. What Major Carrera was just talking about was that the movement of air can create that low pressure region, which creates lift. So when I turn on the hair dryer, the movement of air actually creates a lower pressure region within that stream of air, and so I can put the ping pong ball in it, and it'll hold that right within that stream of air. Yeah, say that even more.
White background.
So it's even as it tilts off to the side, that low pressure holds the ball up until I went a little too far and then it fell. But that low pressure is what creates lift, and you can see that and you demonstrate that yourself in your home. And then the last one, this maybe shows a little bit more directly on how it would work on a wing. You just take a piece of paper and you blow over top of the paper. That creates that low pressure, and you'll see the paper rise up. So that's how we create lift, even in airplanes.
Very good. Cool. So hopefully that creates some questions for the next person or next iteration, or for your interns there, and they might be able to answer those questions. But I hear you guys have some questions for us now.
Joshua Pickering, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He asks, when did you start flying airplanes?
I think that differs for everybody.
Yeah.
I didn't start flying until I was 25, but I'm sure everyone else, or a lot of people start flying when they're as early as 14, 15 years old.
Yeah, so I actually started flying when I was 15. I actually had my private class license before I even had my permit to drive a car. So my parents had to give me a ride to the airport in order to take lessons.
I'm kind of similar to Ryan in that actually the first time I ever flew an airplane was my first training sortie in the Air Force. That is not usually the standard. What I think you could probably take away from this is that if you're interested in flying, particularly for the military, the earlier you start, the easier that path will be for you. But it's not impossible, even if you don't get the flying time.
So from Javier and Zayla Piano, they asked, what is your favorite thing about the Air Force, and what kind of planes do you guys fly?
It's a great question, Javier. Personally, my favorite thing about the Air Force, it's kind of funny, when I joined, it was the airplanes. I wanted to join and fly airplanes, but honestly, walking away, or not walking away, but currently in the system now, are the people. The people are just unmatched in the Air Force. I get to work with some of the best people in the world, and as much as I razz them and make fun of them, these guys are some of my best friends, and I get to go fly awesome airplanes with them. So that's my favorite thing about the Air Force.
I'll compound on that, because all of us here at this table, we all fly heavy airplanes, so we get to fly with a crew. So not only do we get to go out and fly those airplanes, which is just a ton of fun, but we get to do it with our friends and those people that Major Carrera was talking about.
And specifically with test pilots, and they tend to be nerds, which, you know, I enjoy hanging out with nerds. I'm a nerd myself. But people who love science and technology, engineering and mathematics, they tend to get along together. So I do get along well with people and get to fly really interesting airplanes.
And to the second part of that question, I think was what type of aircraft do we get to fly? One of the unique parts about our job being test pilots is that we get to fly pretty much almost anything in the inventory, which is not typical of an Air Force career. So if you talk to most pilots in the Air Force, they go through pilot training, and then they become part of a tribe. And I call it a tribe, but basically they're assigned an airframe, whether it's the C-17, F-22, F-16, whatever it might be. They'll follow that career path, and they'll fly that airplane for the most part throughout their career. However, a test pilot gets to fly pretty much everything that the Air Force owns and more. So it's a very unique job and very exciting.
From Elijah LaFoon, how many times have you flown a jet plane?
Ooh, that's a great question, Elijah.
How many sorties?
So yeah, it depends whether you're talking about the number of takeoffs and landings or the number of different types of jet airplanes. For all of us, the number is probably going to be somewhere around 15 to 20 different types of airplanes, and numbers of sorties somewhere above 100, maybe even 200, depending on what background you come from. A lot of us fly the tankers and the big airlift planes, and they have multiple jet engines on them. So every time we go fly jet planes, and it's a lot of fun.
Great answer to that. One of the other things too, in case I think I'm looking at the question from a different perspective, is jet airplanes are sometimes misconstrued. You know, we think about it with fire, right? You think about this airplane right here that has 2 jets in the back, right? But this airplane, you don't see it. It doesn't have it on here, but it's a prop aircraft, but it also has a jet engine inside. The concept is the same for the engine that's inside of a vehicle, your car in your garage. The suck, squeeze, bang, blow. Basically, you're taking air, you're compressing it, you're adding fuel to it, and you're igniting it, and you're creating energy out of it. The difference is that we do it in a more linear fashion in a jet engine compared to your reciprocal engines that are in your cars, which they use pistons and they kind of go up and down. It's the best way to kind of describe that. And I hope that answers the other perspective of the question if anybody was thinking it was that way. So.
And because I know, I'm going to jump in here real quick and ask you guys to talk about the difference when you go to test pilot school, the reason why you are trained in so many different aircraft and why you get to fly all sorts of different planes where the career path isn't always the similar.
Yeah, I think part of the reason is that we want to have a very broad knowledge base in terms of what makes aircraft perform the way they do, the flight characteristics. So if we just do one aircraft, we don't get that broad knowledge that is applicable to sort of a large number of airframes.
And that's kind of again the whole test pilot perspective, right? So the guys that stick with one airframe, they're very good in that one airframe, and they need to be because they're going out, they're doing a very specific mission. Whereas our mission, while specific, like Ryan talked about, is very broad, right? So we go to test pilot school so that we get the experiences with multiple aircraft, so that when we see a different aircraft and we get into it, it's just another airplane, right? It's not oh, hey, I don't know how to fly this. It's, oh, I've seen something like this and I can adapt my abilities in order to accurately figure out what's going on with that aircraft for whatever test program we're doing.
I'll expand on that a little bit too. Ultimately, it all comes back to the mission, right? So the mission is what we want to do with the Air Force day to day, and different missions are going to require different types of airplanes. So for one mission, you may want an airplane that can go really, really fast. It has big jet engines. Maybe it needs to be able to shoot, maybe it doesn't. But that airplane in design is going to be very different from something that we want to go slow, maybe be able to stay in a geographical area for a long period of time and take pictures. For that application, maybe a propeller airplane is more appropriate. So from our perspective as test pilots, it's our job to test either the new airplanes that the Air Force is buying or the cool new gadgets that they're putting on the airplanes that we already have. So just to kind of further elaborate on what these two guys already said, it's a broad-based knowledge to understand all the missions and how we can best help develop those new airplanes and new gadgets to make what we're giving to our soldiers in the front line the best product we can give them.
And one thing I want to add on to that, I guess, is the phrase that I love about test pilot school is that they put us into these aircraft to make us comfortable being uncomfortable. Because as Toast here said, Major Carroll said, is that we go out and test new designed aircraft, new designed weapon systems, and sometimes they've never been flown before. You're the first one flying it. And so you have an idea of what to expect because we use something called predict, test, validate. So you kind of go into it with an idea of what's going to happen, but you have to be ready for something, the unknown, right? And so that uncomfortableness that comes with flying a new airframe is what they prepare you for. So they give you a broad knowledge base like you talked about. So that way when you go in there and it seems a little bit different, you hopefully can lean back on the knowledge that you have gained through test pilot school.
Okay. Also from Elijah Lafone, did you have to take a lot of classes to become a pilot?
A lot of school. And the amount of school that you would have to take would differ depending on whether you were going to be, say, an operational pilot, a civilian pilot, or a test pilot. Where we all currently live in the test pilot world, that's very heavy in math and science and classes like that. And actually, to get into most of the test pilot schools, you have to have an undergraduate college degree in some type of STEM field, so read math and science. But if you just wanted to be a pilot and not do the test pilot thing, you don't necessarily have to go into the STEM side of it too. So generally aviation, flying small planes, flying in the airlines. Miguel here can tell you a little bit about that. or flying just say operational missions for the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, and the Army. You could take any types of different class, which will all end in some type of aviation-related class, which for us in the military is a class we call undergraduate pilot training. It's a year-long course where they teach you just about everything you need to know about flying planes for the military.
So from Juliet Soberanes, she asked, what do you like most about being a pilot?
You guys go.
Being a pilot or being a test pilot? I'll answer specifically for being a test pilot because that's kind of what we do here. What I like most about being a test pilot is going out and solving a different problem every day. We get handed pretty complicated issues of, you know, you're going to evaluate a new gadget on a new airplane, or upgrading flight controls on an airplane, or dropping something new out of the back of an airplane. So every day we kind of have a different specific actual like flight or mission that we're going to go and execute. So we work with big teams and we get to solve these fun problems, and it kind of changes every day. And that varies a little bit from the operational side, in which they have their mission, such as airlift, where they're moving cargo and people from point A to point B. And that's kind of all they do really for the majority of their career.
Yeah, one of the things that attracted me to being a pilot would be being able to travel to different places around the world. The C-17 goes to some amazing places, Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia, all around North America, South America. So places that I wouldn't normally even be able to visit, I got to go in the C-17. But in terms of being a test pilot, normally, like if this book right here represented all the knowledge you need as a regular C-17 pilot, you would have to read this and find out, how do I operate the aircraft? But one of the things I like about being a test pilot is that there is no book. We have to like write the book ourselves, which is an exciting process of science and engineering and working with other people. So that's what I enjoy about it.
A question from Mila and Josiah Castro. They kind of asked a similar question, but we'd like to know how you became a test pilot and what challenges you faced.
So good question, Mila and Josiah. Yeah, getting to be a test pilot is challenging. There's only a handful of schools in the world that can train you to be what we call a patch certified test pilot, or you're going to wear a test pilot school graduate patch. And like I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, some of that is based in education. So in order to go to the Air Force test pilot school here at Edwards Air Force Base, you have to have an undergraduate degree at a minimum in some type of STEM field, math, science, chemistry, something like that, engineering. But beyond that, even more, you have to have experience in flying lots of things, or good experience in your community or your airplane where you came from. And I think that's probably different for each and every one of us. I think the challenge in my case was getting that experience in a reasonable enough time to be able to still be young enough to apply and get here before some rules they have. And that's a lot of administrative stuff on the Air Force side. But the real answer there is taking the time to get the experience and the education you need to be qualified to apply, and then getting to the school and knocking a home run out of the park and really learning how to be a good test pilot.
A question from Finn Goodpasture. He asked, how do you handle the stress of being a test pilot? Because mostly you have to put your trust in the builders of the plane.
So I think the biggest thing that we all kind of go back on is just our training, right? So yeah, you get put into the stressful situations, but like Miguel talked about, you know, we're trained to be okay with being uncomfortable, and also having that engineering background. You know, we don't just go into the airplane not knowing what to expect, right? We sit down with all the engineers and we have a good plan going into it, so that everybody is able to ask the questions that they need to ask, so that moving forward, we have a really good plan and we can still have a good idea of what to expect, so that, you know, it's not completely unexpected, but if things were to go that avenue, we are comfortable and we come up with a way to move forward and be successful during those test programs.
I'll add on that just a little bit. He kind of hit on it, but one of the things that we do before we go and fly any of these test missions is develop a really thorough test plan and a safety plan on how we're going to go execute that test mission safely. So there are
many, many more hours dedicated to planning on the ground before you actually get into the airplane and go fly.
A question from Vanessa Torres. What was the most difficult decision you made as a pilot?
I can kick that off, I suppose. So we all come from different backgrounds, like we talked about. I actually am a reservist in the Air Force, which means that I play dual roles. I have a military job and I also have a civilian job. When I was back in 2014, I had the ability and option to get out of active duty Air Force. I was active duty and go to the civilian side. And it was the toughest decision I've ever made in my military career to go do that. I've never looked back in the sense of once I went that direction, it was a great thing that happened for myself and my family. But that personally was one of the hardest decisions to make, was to make that transition to the reserves.
There's a lot of things about flying that can be challenging, and a lot of it depends at what point on what I'll call the aviation curve that you're on. So if you're a student pilot, the hardest thing that you may have to do is just learn all that knowledge. So I'll point to the book here that Ryan talked about. You got to learn all this in a short period of time. That's really hard, and you might know it one day, but then you don't fly for a couple of weeks, and you come back to it and you forgot some of it. So you got to go back and reread it. So as a student pilot, that's hard. And I'll even go to the other end of the curve. And as an instructor pilot, I think one of the hardest things that I've experienced in my career is, having to tell somebody on, say, an evaluation that they just weren't good enough and they didn't do well. That's hard. And that has to come with the fact that, it's not going to be a success every day in terms of learning, but you can help those individuals learn better so that the next time they come back and attempt, say, that ride again, that they're going to do really well and they'll pass the ride that time. So that's a little specific, but there's challenges all the way from student till the senior instructor role in the flying community.
Vanessa Torres also asks, what is V1 and V2?
Yes.
Tag your answer.
Yeah, this is the question I was looking for. Vanessa, great question. First of all, out of all the questions, that one seemed the most technical, and to be thinking about a technical question on that level at your age is really awesome. So keep asking the hard questions and keep going in that path, in that direction. So to answer your question though, V1 and V2 are decision marker. Well, V1 is a decision marker. V2 is a specific climb gradient or climb speed that we need for the aircraft. So V1, we'll talk about V1 first, and better yet, we'll talk about TOLD. TOLD in any aircraft is takeoff and landing data. There's a lot of definitions that go into TOLD. There's refusal speed, there's critical field length, there's your rotate speed, there's liftoff speed. All these things are calculated to give you your takeoff and landing data. But V1 is what we call decision speed. It is the speed at which we are committed to the takeoff. So when we push up the power and we're rolling down the runway, prior to V1, we have the ability to abort the takeoff and stop safely on the runway. Once we reach V1 though, we are committed to that takeoff, and anything that happens after that, emergency-wise, malfunction, we continue the takeoff and treat it as an airborne emergency. So that's V1. And that's all predicated on your calculations that you do. It can be weight of the aircraft, temperature and pressure altitude, and then the runway that you're on. It can be short, long, those type of things. So those drive V1. V2 is your climb out speed. So it's specifically your engine out climb out speed. So if you were to lose an engine at V1 and you continue the takeoff, your next speed that you would climb to is at V2. So you would maintain V2, and it gives you the safe airspeed to climb at 200 feet per nautical mile to a safe altitude, basically.
So to add on to that, so if this table's the runway, and here's the aircraft going left and right, TOLD describes the ability for you to accelerate, take off, and also to be able to stop if you make that decision at V1. So in the U.S. Air Force, we like to be able to get all the way to our takeoff speed and make a decision to continue or to stop on the runway. There are other agencies or countries out there that are a little crazier than us, and maybe the crazy Russians like to just have enough runway to take off at the end of the runway, right? But we're a little more conservative, and we play it a little safer. So.
Great question, though.
So a question from Hunter Gomez, and he asked, have you ever been in a supersonic flight?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh,
we
We all have.
Yep.
You get to do it if you go to test pilot school.
Yep.
That's a good reason to want to go to test pilot school. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I would reverse the question on the students and say, you hear a boom, right, if you're on the ground when a plane goes supersonic. Do you think there's a boom if you're in the airplane? And I know you can't answer that. So we'll just have an awkward pause here. And
Just
then,
think about
Mark here will answer that question for me.
You don't.
Yeah, there's actually very little indication when you cross the sound barrier in the airplane. You don't hear it at all. Depending on the conditions of the air around the airplane and the moisture content, you might see the shock waves as they form on the leading surfaces of the airstream as it's touching the airplane. But inside the airplane, if you happen to look at any of the air data instruments, so the airspeed indicator, the altimeter, you might see a little bit of fluctuation in your needle or the indicator, depending on how that system is what we call MEC'd. If it's going through a computer or if it's just taking analog data and piping it back to some type of indicator in the airplane. And that's really all you see. And if you weren't paying attention to that, you'd never even know. You just have to look at the number on your gauge to know that, oh, I'm making a big boom outside right now. And then hopefully not have to do the paperwork.
One of the cool things and why we don't feel anything in the aircraft is because of design. Designers have designed that out. In the early days, when you watch the old videos of Chuck Yeager, the guys that were pioneering the supersonic flight, you see videos of them in the cockpit. It's shaking, it's rattling, and they're like 0.9, 0.95, and then they hit the sound barrier, and then it gets quiet. And that's because at the time they didn't know how to design an aircraft that can go through the sound barrier effortlessly. And so we've learned over time. We've had lessons learned over the designs, and we've come up with aircraft that can do it easily. This aircraft, if you can see, I'll try and bring it up here. One of the first designs that solved that is you see a Coke bottle shape. You see this little area right here. It's kind of thinner here than it is here at the edges of the, on the fuselage. And that was one of the designs that mitigated that shaking and everything, and it makes it smooth going through the sound barrier. So going back to what these guys said, you don't feel anything in the cockpit. It's kind of anticlimactic. So as a pilot, it's not as cool as we expected, we wanted it to be, but it's still a cool thing to say that we were able to go supersonic.
That said, I do know a few fighter pilots that like to have sonic boom competitions here at Edwards. So if you ever happen to hear acceleratingly loud booms, you know what's going on.
Sure.
I will say that scientists in the early 40s, some of them thought that it was impossible to break the sound barrier, and that if you approached it, the airplane would blow up or disintegrate. So it is important to think back and say, oh, wow, what is possible, what's impossible? That's our job here to figure that out, and that's what's kind of exciting about it.
So the second part to Hunter's question is, do you have to skydive as a test pilot?
I wish.
Only if you eject.
Yeah.
Only if it's a bad day. We do not. No, it is. We have to have parachute training in the cases of emergency, as Captain Weed alluded to, but it is not a requirement to go out and skydive.
Now that said, you can skydive for fun on the side. You got to do a little paperwork to make sure you're good with the Air Force, safety paperwork. But I've been skydiving 3 times. It's a blast. I recommend it if you can do it safely. And I've got a good friend, Mikey, here at the base, who's a flight test engineer, and he's an avid skydiver. He goes out regularly, actually, to skydive here in California. But it's not part of the job. That's just for fun on the side.
Tommy Nasser asks, do you enjoy your job, and how many flights have you been on?
I'd say it's pretty safe to say we all definitely enjoy our jobs. But again, the number of flights would vary for all of us.
Probably 1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the Air Force, we don't actually, we don't count we do count the flights. You can go back and you can probably list it all out. But when it comes to aviation, most pilots will annotate their experience through their hours. So we talk about our experience, and we'll say we have 2,500 hours or 1,000 hours. So we mark those as kind of our success throughout our career. Hitting 500 hours is a big thing. Hitting 1,000 hours in an airplane is a big deal. So we celebrate those, things like that.
And a question from Victoria, I don't know if it's Michael or Mitchell. Do you like driving the airplanes, and how fast and far do airplane guns shoot?
I'll tackle it fast and I'll tackle the distance.
I don't have an answer.
That's a good question, Victoria. And the answer is the famous one that you can pretty much say in test pilot school and always be right. It depends. It depends on the airplane and the type of gun or the type of weapon that you're using. So airplanes are designed, like we talked about earlier, for specific missions. So we have everything they can go very, very slow. You know, we'll call the equivalent of 50 or 60 miles an hour. A lot of our UAV airplanes can fly slow. And we also are currently working on developing both weapons and airplanes that fly in what we call the hypersonic regime, so above Mach 5. There's only been a handful of airplanes in the history of the world that have been able to fly that fast. The X-15, the space shuttle, was able to do that. So that's a very, very wide range on just the airplane itself. Now, on the gun question, the weapons question, it depends there as well. It depends on what the weapon is being designed for. So you can have weapons that will be traditional guns on an airplane, and they'll usually use those to defend themselves against other airplanes in a dogfight, or to do strafing runs on the ground to strike a ground target. We test that kind of stuff here at Edwards Air Force Base, and we test it elsewhere around the country as part of Air Force Material Command. But we also use other types of weapons called bombs and missiles, and they have different purposes. I think from a technical perspective, the interesting thing about that is a bomb is unguided, and it's just like a big rock falling through the sky, and it has tail fins and a guidance system. You can use GPS, and it can fly itself to a coordinate. So we do a lot of testing on stuff like that. And then a missile, kind of the same thing, except that it has a rocket motor. So you can drop it, and it has a rocket motor that actually gives it its initial speed, and then it uses tail fins and a guidance system as well to kind of guide it in the right direction. And the distance that those can all reach is going to depend on what they're being designed to do.
You didn't answer the question. No, but seriously, a bullet will come out of a gun on an airplane at several thousand feet per second. So every few seconds, it's going 1 mile, and it'll fly for up to 10, 20 seconds. So it can go 5 miles, 10 miles before it hits the ground. So these are very fast things, and things that go very far, and they're all following ballistic trajectories, which is, for a scientist, is very exciting to be able to look at those things.
A lot of science and a lot of math involved there.
So the third last part of Victoria's question is, how come airplanes don't crash other airplanes at night?
I'll take that one. Yeah. Go ahead. So the big thing is all aircraft are equipped with different systems that help us to avoid other airplanes. So it's called a traffic collision and avoidance system is one way that we do that. So basically there's a system on pretty much all airplanes that can kind of talk to other airplanes and know where they're at in relation to each other. And the pilots will get an advisory saying, hey, there's another airplane here. You need to climb, you need to descend. And then the other part that helps to avoid those collisions is air traffic control. So pretty much every time you fly, there's people on the ground who are looking at radar stations and talking to the different airplanes and knowing where they're at. And if they start to see a conflict or something, they'll tell one of the airplanes to either change their course, change their altitude, so that we don't have those issues.
So essentially, we have Find My Friends, except for airplanes. And we can see where everybody else is, and they can see where we are. And so that's how we avoid each other.
Yeah, that's an important thing as well to talk about the ATC piece too. Looks like we have highways on the ground. We have highways in the sky too. And although in your car, you may only rely on yourself and your knowledge of what road you're going down and the road signs, when you fly an airplane, you actually work with people that work in office buildings on the ground. And they can see a radar blip of you on a big screen, and they basically make sure that you stay on the highway in the sky. And they can help with what we call deconfliction, which is the answer to that question, making sure planes don't run into each other day or night.
A question from Kobe Hull. Why does Edwards Air Force Base need jet planes? Or fighter jets, I'm sorry.
Anybody?
I don't know if it necessarily needs it. So I'll try to tackle this one. But Edwards Air Force Base is, with its geography here, with the desert, we have this massive, long, dry lake bed that is a natural resource that the Air Force has used for a very long time. And because of that lake bed that's right there, it's proven to be really useful in testing jet aircraft. So I think we brought jet aircraft out to Edwards because of the location itself, and it just was a natural choice to be used for testing jet airplanes.
So those are the questions we have so far.
All right.
We got them all. All right.
Awesome.
Oh, Melody, I was going to suggest that you ask the questions that you had, because I think that gets into a little bit more of, we do have some students that are a little bit older. So Melody, did you want to ask your questions? Or no? Do you want me to ask her questions?
Yes.
The ones that you added, she has really great questions about if you want to be an aerospace engineer or flight test engineer, do you have to get a degree in aerospace?
That's a great question.
No.
And you do not. Nope. So aerospace, the aerospace realm encompasses everything that goes into an airplane, right? And not only the airplanes, the ATC facilities, that anything that deals with flying airplanes is kind of considered aerospace, right? So yes, aerospace engineers know how to design the wing, know how to design that Coke bottle shape that we were talking about. But we also have a lot of systems that go on board that talk communication-wise, weapon system-wise. So if you're an electrical engineer, structural engineer, if you know how to code, those are all excellent backgrounds to have that would be highly valued in the aerospace industry.
There's also the chemistry that goes into the jet fuel. There's the biology that goes into the human up front, and that opens up a whole nother realm of possibilities of getting into aerospace. There's just so many things that go into flying and aerospace that if you stay anywhere close to a STEM field, you'll be able to get into that.
Find what you like and then pursue it. And if it's anything STEM related, there's a good chance that the experience you have is very relevant to flight test engineering world.
And the last thing I'll say about that too is really the degree is the ticket, right? It's the ticket to get you in. Once you get into these major aerospace companies, they're going to also teach you and provide you the skills that you need to design whatever widget or be a part of whatever project team you're going to be a part of. So don't think that just because you have the degree that's the only knowledge you're going to get. You're forever going to be in school and learning and developing new things for yourself as well. So.
I have 2 other questions, if that's okay with you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, send them.
Okay, so the first one is, I've heard that many people who want to be an engineer in aeronautics or aerospace would like to get experience, but is it okay if you aren't capable of getting that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You got to start somewhere, right?
Exactly, yeah. But continue to ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask. That's the biggest thing is there's plenty of opportunities out there to get involved and get the experience. So just because one route that you might know of is closed and you applied to and you couldn't get in or something, I almost assuredly can tell you that there's other routes that are out there that you probably just don't know. You just got to go find and ask the right questions to the right people.
And with that, don't be afraid to ask or apply to things just because you don't think you have that experience. You don't think you have, whatever, even if they say it's a minimum, I'm a big proponent of ask. The worst that a place or somebody can tell you is no. And with that, who knows what else that opens up. So maybe they say no, but I know about this other thing where what you put in might be applicable. So never discount yourself or disqualify yourself because of what you think. Still put in, and again, the worst they're going to say is no.
I have that personal experience. I applied to test pilot school with the expectation that I was not going to get in. I was pretty old, and it was my last time to be able to apply. And I went into it thinking that, well, listen, if I apply, at least I can sit at the end of my life and say that I applied. You know, those who did not apply will never get the opportunity, right? Or did not ask the questions, did not talk to whoever they wanted to talk to. They're never going to get the answer they want. So you at least go up and, you know, if the answer is no, it's no, but at least you tried. And that was my case. I applied, and I was very surprised to hear that I got picked up. So
I have a similar story. I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy when I was in high school, and went through all the process and the extra meetings that went along with it, and ultimately got told no thanks at the end of that. But here we are today, you know, 15 years later, and ended up exactly where I wanted to be. So the lesson there is never give up. There's always another route. Keep digging, and you will find your way.
And one more thing on that, this is along the same lines. There's just so much to say on this.
Right.
Just because you're told no once doesn't mean it's the end of the road. I might not be the only one here, maybe I am. I applied to test pilot school twice before they said, yeah, okay. I applied the first time and they said no. And I spent that next year making myself more competitive. I went and was pursuing a master's degree in mathematics. So I had that on my resume that next time around, and was a little bit more competitive and got picked up the second time. So just because you're told no once doesn't mean that it's the end of the road. You can still try again in the future.
And if you are capable of getting that experience, what kind of experience like should anyone get?
Well, starting in college, I can say that you should get involved in research as soon as you can, because research is the process by which we figure out how things work, and that's essentially what we're doing as test pilots. So get involved in research, be involved with your classes and your professors, and just have a good attitude. That's what advice I could give.
I think internships is another good avenue for that. Those types of things come up. I know you two hosting the meeting here today are interns. So anytime you have an opportunity to go get involved with an organization that's working on the things that you want to study, grab that opportunity by the horns and go after it. That's only going to be valuable for you down the road. Not only is it on the line in your resume, but you're meeting people that are probably going to introduce you to other people you want to know to get even farther into that field that you want to study.
Those are the questions I have. I don't know if anybody has any other questions.
No, that's really good. One of our focuses here is really not only to inspire young people, but also to talk to them about career paths and sticking with school and resilience and not giving up. So we appreciate that very much. Gentlemen, we appreciate your time. The Flight Test Museum, our purpose is to help inspire, to teach about the history of all of the amazing things that have been developed at Edwards. And using flight test and the airplanes at Edwards, we can teach basic physics and math. And we really want the students to think critically like engineers. And as test pilots, that's what you do. That ability to look at different wings, different engines, different positions, where the payload, what the purpose is, all of those things to help them to think critically about all of their subjects and to look at things from different perspectives. So we appreciate your time, and I will send you a copy of your interview after I do a little editing. On that note.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.